Surgeons of Reddit, what is the most fucked up thing seen in someone's body? Surgeon here, trauma patient with who fell on steel rebar and it went in one side of the chest and out the other side long ways, somehow missed his heart, esophagus, major arteries. We removed it with no critical injuries. Edit, for those asking. He came in very stable, so we were able to do imaging and see no obvious major vessel or heart injury. We then removed it in the operating room in case moving it revealed an injury, basically completely ready to crack the chest if he started bleeding, but otherwise just pulled it out, got bilateral chest tubes but did not end up needing any large surgeries. I saw a show where they tested something like that. A guy had slipped and fell on a plan stake that went from the bottom right ribcage, up through the chest and out the left side of his neck. I think he even walked onto the earth like that, and there was surprisingly little trauma for what looked absolutely horrible. The show came to the conclusion that his saving grace was that the stake was dull, not sharp, so it kinda pushed past everything critical without serious damage. Their experiment with a sharpened stake was much more lethal. Definitely one lucky guy. Edit, the sharpened stake test was done against some water balloons, with the reenactment done with a ballistic gel dummy. The amount of people who come to my hospital after getting surgery in a cheaper country is astounding. The results are terrible. The skin is oozing pus, and the resulting infections take forever to clear. When they say it's not the surgeon's fault and that they are going back for more surgeries, I almost wanna smack him. Neurosurgeon here. Guy came into the hospital with 3 days of headache out of nowhere. Head court showed a large nail through the anterior skull base, think above the nose, between the forehead. When asked about it, he had been using a pneumatic nail gun a couple days before. He remembered the moment when he didn't brace the gun right and it rebounded, hitting him in the face. It must have fired a nail when the end hit him in the face and he didn't realize it. He indeed did have a small wound in his cheek that fit with the story. Luckily the nail avoided the large blood vessels and other critical structures in the brain. We had to take him to surgery in order to pull it out. Cutting it out of his brain was weird. Dentist. We had 2 men come into reception, one of whom had a snooker ball in his mouth. The man who didn't explain that they'd been at the snooker club down the road, and his friend bet someone £50 that he could fit the snooker ball in his mouth. He won the bet, then found he couldn't get it out. We had to sedate him and dislocate his jaw to remove it. Edit, just woke up to lots of that happened in MASH. I had no idea, never really watched it, but shall look for the relevant episode. Dislocating his jaw and taking the ball out was actually pretty quick and easy. The part that took longest was getting him sedated. Also, I had no idea snooker was such an English thing. My mother-in-law used to be a scrub nurse, and she told us a story about a patient they had in the OR who purposely cut up little bits of a metal coat hanger and barbed them so they couldn't be removed, then proceeded to shove them up his urethra. I can't remember the actual medical term for it, but he was one of those people who had a mental health issue and wanted surgeries done, so he would constantly do terrible things to himself because they would have to surgically correct them. Hamster is number 1, an entire doorknob which ripped out of the door, screws and all. The guy swears he fell while putting on his shoes. After that, every time someone changed shoes to go to the OR, our little 80-year-old path would say, "Watch out for the doorknob. Don't turn your back on it," and laugh himself into a crying fit. Absolutely magical to see. This one's not my story. A buddy worked for again, had a pregnant PT come in to remove rotting fruit from her vagina. Several times a month, her husband had a kink. They called her fruit salad. Not internal but external. A PT came in after being stabbed, at a county bar, and did not want his pants cut off. Turns out he had a kielbasa sausage taped to his inner thigh so it looked like a bulge in his Wranglers. The strangest one would be pulling out a 10-inch long strand of free-floating, unpigmented, hair from a 9-year-old girl's abdominal cavity. No idea how it got there. Edit, to answer some recurring questions. It definitely was not from a teratoma and was found by chance while performing another procedure. She then had exploratory surgery to further investigate and nothing abnormal was found. Not really fucked up, Rather common but uncommon non-reaction. Dead cucumber inside a vagina. Wife and husband were playing with it. A bit broke off and never came out, so they just decided to ignore it. Started rotting inside and caused a bad secondary infection. The smell, secretions, and the sight of those morons' faces as they were explaining was priceless. One of the, now countless, days I felt something die inside me. Not a surgeon but a patient. I had emergency surgery about 20 years ago in a really small rural hospital. 2 months later I had to have another surgery in a better hospital because the doctors of the first surgery had accidentally left some items including gauze and a small cutting tool inside my body when they sewed me back up. My friend couldn't pee at all and said he felt like something was blocking his urethra. It got to the point where the pain made him pass out. He was taken to the hospital. His mom told the nurses there that he drank a lot of water to try and force what was blocking his pee out. So a nurse put a catheter in him, but the moment it went in, a large amount of coagulated blood and urine shot out like a cannon. Fortunately, a divider was up or else it would have flown across the air. Turns out my friend's bladder was bleeding and it coagulated. Little bits would come out but he didn't notice them as he pees sitting down and would flush before standing up. He's better now and they still don't know how he is still alive today. Doctors told him and his parents that his bladder is okay and the bleeding was just temporary. It's a traumatizing event for him, so he hardly talked about it and his parents have mostly forgotten about the incident. Old man comes in with pain and a swollen foot. Has an old dressing on his calf. We cut open the dressing and there are insects flying here and there. The whole area under was infested with maggots. Apparently he got a small prick from somewhere, got a dressing for the wound from a PHC and left it there for 4 or 5 months. There was no muscles left. This happened to a family member. He had a small cut on his foot that got infected. He was treating it with polysporin and band-aids for close to 4 months when he finally saw a doctor in the air. They removed one half his foot that night due to gangrene. He almost learned he has diabetes, and 9 years later is still dealing with an open wound from that surgery. Take care of yourself, people. I remember hearing a story about a barber who found one of his regulars in a similar situation. Old guy's family put him in a nursing home and he disappeared for months until one day he just showed up with a couple nurses, who just dropped him off and said they'd come back in an hour. Guy was white as a sheet, wearing a ratty ball cap, and barely coherent even though before the home he was completely lucid and vibrant looking. Barber tried to take the cap off. Ended up ripping out some of the guy's scalp to reveal a whole nest of maggots in his skull. Apparently he fell while in the home and hit his head. They just stuck a gauze pad on him or something and left it alone. Old guy died a couple weeks later. My dad had diabetes but hated going to the doctor and wore compression socks, but he never took them off. Would either roll them down or pull them up. Well, you're not supposed to wear them 24/7, so he ended up having to go to the ER with big lacerations around his legs because the sacks were cutting into his skin. He spent a month or 2 in the hospital and when he came home refused to have his dressing changed and wouldn't go back for follow-ups. Several months later his legs never healed, then his legs turned blue. He had to be taken to the ER again where they had to amputate his legs. Then they had to take more, and then his lungs filled with fluid and his kidneys shut down. He passed away shortly after that, all because he didn't like going to the doctor. But a lad dropped off at A&D with crossbow bolts stuck in his upper thigh. His story was that he was walking through a local park with his loaded crossbow and tripped, shooting himself in his thigh. 2 days later another lad was dropped off at A&D with a Bowie knife stuck in his upper thigh. His story was that he was walking through a local park with a knife in his hand and tripped, stabbing himself in his thigh. It turned out that the first lad was a member of the Burger Bar Boys and the second lad was a member of the Johnson crew. Both were members of rival gangs and there had been an argument which had been sorted out. One of my friend's children had a piece of popcorn in his lungs for a while many years ago. The child had a gagging fit while eating popcorn, and then complained about his chest. He had a bronchoscopy, but nothing was found with the equipment available at that time. Finally one day he tumbled off the bed, and knocked the wind out of himself. He coughed, and coughed, and coughed, and up came the popcorn. I am not a surgeon, but I knew a girl who would clean up after surgeries. One of the funniest stories I ever heard. Doctor, excuse me sir. So we found a blockage in your urethra. Can you think of any reason why a peanut would be in there? Patient, ha ha ha, oh damn. Well, my wife and I play a game called Feed the Elephant, and what happens is she puts a peanut M&M inside my dick and she then sucks them out. Apparently one must have gotten stuck, so the chocolate on the M&M melted off and the peanut stayed. So M&Ms melt in your dick and not in your hands apparently. Not a surgeon, but this is a really fucked up story I've heard my mom tell a few times about her days in social work. Usually to someone who is looking to get into social work, kind of make sure you really want to do this thing. It's a bit long. She had a woman who was irregular, lot of mental issues, homebound. We'll call the woman Anne, no idea what her name is. She almost never moved from her chair, and I mean that literally. Pooped in the chair on the reg and just sat in it. I don't really know how she fed herself. Maybe a different service brought her food. Regardless, nobody wanted to be there long because of the smell. This will be relevant later. Anyway, she calls my mom because she has a lump in her arm that's bugging her. Mom gets there, all the lights are out, bulb is dead. This will be relevant later as well. No replacements in the house. Goes to a few other houses to try to get a bulb, and only one she can find is a green bulb she gets from a kid who is home alone for some reason. Goes back to Anne and screws in the bulb. Since it's a green bulb, it's still pretty dim. Goes to look at the lump in her arm, which is visible even in the dim light, but then notices something weird is going on with Anne's legs. It looks like the skin is rippling like water. My mom asks about it and gets a non-response. Then she pokes her leg and it's basically hollow. She had diabetes apparently and her legs rotted, and the rippling was all the maggots eating the dead skin. They actually saved her life. I guess nobody noticed it was happening because they would basically just hand her food and take off. Probably the bulb had been out a while too. Oh, and the lump was a softball-sized tumor. I worked with a few guys that used to work at the local prison, and they said they had an inmate do something similar, except it had only been up there 3 days. He said he was having some issues but wouldn't say. His bunkmate told on him, so they ushered him into the infirmary, pulled his pants down, and the nurse said on the count of 3 I'm going to pull this out, and went 1. Pull and yanked it out, and there was as nothing but blood and pus and urine all coming out at once like a stopped up water hose. The inmate let out just a huge sigh of relief and sounded like he was having the best day of his life in that moment. Former surgical assistant here. For a while I worked at a bush hospital in a village in unnamed African country for privacy, and saw some insane shit. As for fucked up things I found inside a body specifically, I'll just share one. A 21-year-old woman who recently had a C-section and tubal ligation at a different hospital was brought to us by her family due to her deteriorating condition, and because they didn't trust the surgeon she had seen. We perform an exploratory lap and find out that she didn't have a tubal ligation. The fucking quack who cut this woman open had snipped her ureters, not her fallopian tubes. In the end, her health was so poor that even though we cleaned her out and reconnected her remaining, only one was viable, ureter, her body could not heal and she died a few days later. Worked in a children's hospital years ago. Had one kid come in who would stick anything he could up his urethra, because that was how his mom would punish him when she had custody of him. The strangest though was a young girl who ate rocks. She ate so many her bowels became backed up. She was the whitest white I had ever seen. We had doctors come from different parts of the hospital just to catch a glimpse, because some said it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I work in early childhood education and I've met 2 kids with pica. One ate sand and we had to track her constantly because she'd get a cup of sand and hide and eat it. Just used her tongue to kind of lap it up. She had surgery for a bowel obstruction when she was 3. One ate leaves, rocks, bark chips and chewed paint/splinters/tiny fragments of plastic off everything and swallowed them. Took way too long to get a doctor to take her parents seriously because all kids put things in their mouths, yeah, but they don't swallow them. My mom told me the story where she was an RN at a GI unit of a hospital for a guy named Dr. Gupta. This dude comes into the ER with a vibrator so far up his ass they sent him up to GI to see if Dr. Gupta can get it out with his scopes. The whole time during the operation the vibrator is still running. Right before they get it out the vibrator died, and Gupta looks at my mom and says, "Hey, maybe we should just wake him up and see if he wants us to change the batteries." My mom said she peed a little laughing and had to leave the ER to change. I was 11 when she told me the story. I'm not a surgeon, and I don't work with humans, but I'm currently training to be a surgical assistant at the vet clinic I work at. I've asked the senior techs and the doctors I've worked with what the weirdest, most interesting thing is they've seen come out of a pet's rear end. This includes a 12-pound tumor removed from a 15-pound dog. The dog is still alive and kicking. A cat with a dead frog stuck in the fur near her bum. The frog had been pooped out. Lots and lots of socks. A tampon, thankfully in the wrapper. 33 golf balls and 2 ping pong balls. The dog's owner reportedly would hit golf balls off his porch into the woods in his yard, and his German Shepherd would go chasing after it. He never retrieved the balls, so never knew she was eating them. They went to the emergency clinic when she went 3 days without eating, defecating, and she had a weird bumpy stomach. Rocket balloons. You remember the balloons you would pump up and release, and they'd fly around and make weird sounds? My own dog ate them, and he pooped them out. They were encasing his poop. We were quite lucky he didn't end up at the emergency clinic. I was maybe 8 or 9, so the dog was 2, and he lived to be 16, which is great for a lab. I once saw an X-ray, which you can find online, of a snake with a cat inside it. The vet who X-rayed a snake had friends whose cat had gone missing, and it turns out that their cat was eaten by their neighbor's snake when it escaped. I'm not a surgeon, and I don't work with humans, but I'm currently training to be a surgical assistant at the vet clinic I work at. I've asked the senior techs and the doctors I've worked with what the weirdest, most interesting thing is they've seen come out of a pet's rear end. This includes a 12-pound tumor removed from a 15-pound dog. The dog is still alive and kicking. Psych nurse here. I've had patients swallow batteries, razors, rocks, underwire from a bra, insert staples and paper clips under their skin in their forearms. I once had a kid insert an entire pencil under the skin in her forearm. Surprisingly, the only object that actually had to be surgically removed was the kid who shoved the paper clips under her skin in her arm. She developed a nasty infection from it and they were very deep. The kids who swallowed all the objects passed them naturally, with the help of fiber supplements and relax. Okay. Obligatory not a surgeon, but I was there, so it's a real toss-up. 14-inch purplish cucumber. The person drove across 3 states to have it removed from his colon. He did get back home in time for the Sunday morning service. 8 feet of speaker wire up to the urethra and into the bladder. I can't look at monster cable without thinking about it and the knot. Thousands of ascariasis causing bowel obstruction. Don't look it up, just trust me. Hundreds of needles, pins, paper clips, and pieces of wire under a child's skin. Nobody knew how they got there. Entire 8-inch chef's knife file 1 1/2 hole. Knife only visible on straight. Huge T. Gandhi cyst in a brain. Litter boxes are death traps. 6-foot-long chain link post through the chest after a 4-wheeler accident. He did have his helmet on though. A dozen glass teardrop pendants from an antique chandelier in the stomach of a child. A cherry pit from the sinus of a man that stuck it up his nose 40 years earlier. Surprisingly, his lifelong problem with right side sinus drainage resolved. A softball-sized bezoar made of hair and fingernails. Don't ask how it smelled. Well, I found 10 fascinating cases. The patient said that approximately 4 hours earlier he and his boyfriend had been fooling around. After stirring a batch of concrete mix, the patient laid on his back with his feet against the wall at a 45 degrees angle while his boyfriend poured the mixture through a funnel into his rectum. After the concrete mass hardened, it became so painful that he sought medical care. Yeah, no? If the concrete mix is coming out at any time while we're fooling around, that's gonna be a pass from me. Dog. I never thought to put pouring concrete into my ass on my hard limits list, but here we are. Edit. Figuring out how to quote on mobile.